give me one shot here on a blue chip stock, believe me, Kevin, the only problem you're gonna have is that you didn't buy more.
Nobody knows if the stock is going to go up, down, sideways, or in circles.
What's going on, NBA draft fans? Your boys are back, the Wolves of Ball Street, your favorite draft analysts. This is the Draft Deck NBA Draft Podcast on the No Ceilings NBA Draft Podcast feed. My name is Corey Tullivan. I am here, as always, with my co-host, Albert Garbage Time Gim. Albert, what's going on, brother?
All is good. It's an exciting time, as always. I feel like I say that all the time, but it really is, especially for us as a part of the No Ceilings Collective. Obviously, a lot is going on for us, and it's kind of a busy season now that we're in the swing of the college basketball season and the NBA season. So all is good, man. I'm excited. Been out on the road more and doing more games and stuff. We'll be at UCLA tomorrow night again. So excited to be here.
Yeah, are you seeing what game are you seeing tomorrow?
I'm seeing UCLA versus Pepperdine tomorrow.
Let's
night.
go.
So
That's
that's
the
going to
one.
be exciting.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this on the No Ceilings NBA podcast feed and not watching live on YouTube, Albert will already have seen that game go down. So Albert, how was the game?
Great.
Lot of prospects played well. Everyone had fun. But we are not covering any UCLA or Pepperdine prospects, although the Pepperdine guys are very intriguing. And Maxwell of No Ceilings fame just did a fantastic piece on Maxwell Lewis that is up right now at NoCeilingsNBA.com with interviews from Maxwell and the coaching staff at Pepperdine. So if you need some Pepperdine content in your life, No Ceilings has and will continue to have you covered. But tonight or today or this morning, whenever you are consuming this content, we are covering Cason Wallace of the Kentucky Wildcats. The guard will be 19.6 years old on draft night. He is listed at 6'4", 200 pounds, currently averaging 12.6 points per game, 4 rebounds, 4.6 assists, 2.8 turnovers, 3.4 steals, and 0.4 blocks. He is shooting 58.1% from the field, 53.3% from the three-point line, 62.5% from the free throw line. True shooting percentage of 67.3% with a PER of 20.9. Stock price. Current stock price, which is pretty much the same as his preseason stock price. ESPN has him at 11. SB Nation has him at 11. Bleacher Report has him at 6. Basketball News has him at 13. The Athletic has him at 9. Tankathon at 12. Sports Illustrated at 10. No Ceilings at 16. He has an average stock price of 8. So, Albert, as always, is Cason Wallace's draft stock price too high, too low, or just right with an average price of 8?
This is a difficult one for me because even from the last time that I wrote about Cason Wallace last week, a lot has happened. But you know what? For now, Corey, what I will say is I think 8 feels just about right, even though 8 is higher than where I have him on my own personal board. And the reason why is we're going to talk about it, but there's a lot of intrigue with Cason Wallace. There's a lot of reason for these different publications and companies and people to be excited about him, as I was writing about him. And of course, at the same time, there are also reasons for people to have questions about him. Like, Corey, I know you're going to have a lot of questions about him, as you have. And I have questions about him, too, that I honestly tried to avoid in my piece about him because we are only a couple games. We're 5 games into the season, and I want to wait till we get to the very end for me to make any final judgments on him as a prospect for now. So for now, Corey, I'll say 8 feels just about right.
I think it's a little bit high for me personally. He does have a somewhat wide draft range right now, with Bleacher Report having him at 6 and No Ceilings having him at 16. I'm closer to the No Ceilings ranking than I am Bleacher Report's. But it's hard to not see the appeal with Cason Wallace and why he does feel like one of the safer prospects in a draft with a bunch of prospects that I feel like, are kind of volatile, and you're going to have guys really adamantly for or against certain guys at the top. And Cason Wallace, I feel like, is going to be just steady enough that he floats through consistently through the entire season. Now, do I think he is going to keep up 58% from the floor, 53% from the 3-point line, and even 62.5% from the free throw line? No, I think those numbers are going to average out to more normal numbers. This is the first prospect that we are covering during the actual college basketball season with, somewhat real games played. So this evaluation is kind of based on just what we've seen early on, and it could be subject to change throughout the course of the year. But we're here to do what we do, which is go deep into the film that we have watched. But before we do that, I do want to talk about your piece that you wrote on Cason Wallace for NoCeilingsNBA.com, where you compared him to a good pair of scissors. And I think, one, you need to explain where that metaphor came from for the listeners, because I think that the way that that scissors are used in a Korean household, it probably differs from an American household for most people. So, talk to me about why Cason Wallace was a good pair of scissors for you.
To explain, I guess, where this comes from. And now, I don't know. I don't want to claim to know, like, I know all the absolute origins of why scissors are such an essential part of a Korean household. But the one thing that I do know about Korea is Korea, in 1950, went into war, and there was a Korean War between North and South Korea. And from then, after war-torn Korea, with the United States Army, being in South Korea till now, still are there. I think Korea has become a very quickly, rapidly growing country, and we are a tiny country, but we are mighty. We have influence all over the world. If you've never heard of K-pop, then you just need to start reading a newspaper or having
Or
a YouTube
streetwear.
account. Yeah, yeah, all that stuff. Korean barbecue, super famous. I'm sure most of you guys have a Korean television in your home, whether it's a Samsung or an LG or a phone that's Korean, whatever. So where this comes from is that Koreans are super practical. We care about practicality and doing things in a really high efficient way. Now, my comparison for Cason Wallace to him being a great pair of scissors is that if you go to any or most Korean barbecue restaurants, instead of using like a really nice like knife or whatever, Koreans will use really strong commercial use scissors to cut up your meat. And the reason why they do that is, if you don't know, in Korean barbecue, they cook right in front of you at the table. So in the middle of your table, there will be a grill there, whether it's charcoal or gas or whatever. And as they're cooking the meat in front of you, they also want to cut it up into bite-sized pieces so that it's easily ready for the customer to eat it right then and there, and they don't have to cut anything up. So Koreans are really serious about the scissors that they use. And it's an essential part of any Korean home where, whether you're eating meat or whatever it is, we use scissors to cut up a lot of different things. And so my ultimate point with Cason Wallace being compared to a good pair of scissors is that I believe that any and all NBA teams should look at Cason Wallace as an essential piece of their team moving forward if they were to draft him. He's a guy who can do so many different things well that, because he's pretty much average or above average at everything that he does, he immediately raises the floor and ceiling of your team by just having him there, is ultimately the point that I was trying to make. And I hope that came across clear through my piece as well.
I believe that it did, and it made me very hungry for some Korean barbecue. Talking about the versatility of the scissors and Cason Wallace's versatility as a player, I think that for Cason, it's only fair that we start on the defensive side of the floor for him. A lot of times we start on offense, a lot of times we start with shooting, and we'll get there. But I think that when you think of Cason Wallace, you think of defense, right? So let's talk about the defense and if it has lived up to the hype or not. How do you feel about Cason Wallace as an on-ball defender?
I'll say this much, Corey. I do think it's fair to say that he's lived up to the hype. I think if we look just straight up at the numbers, averaging 3.4 steals per game is pretty damn good.
Not
I
bad.
would say, yeah, not bad. Not bad. Just to rattle off the last 3 games against Michigan State, which they lost, he had 8 steals in that game, and then the game he had let me see, he had a steal after that, and then 4 steals in his last game. So that's pretty good. I'd say, right? What's that? 13 steals in 3 games. That's
Yep.
not bad. I'll take that type of production. But I will say though, Corey, I think on the ball, if you watch Cason Wallace, it's really a mix of a lot of different things. Number one, the biggest thing that stuck out to me was the physicality and the mobility of his defense, where he moves so well. And now, of course, being 6'4" and having a compact frame like that with a sturdy lower half, a very, very sturdy lower half, it really does play to his advantage, where he can stay in front of guys, use his physicality to stay in front of guys, have the mobility in his feet to stay in front of them, flipping his hips, right? That's a common saying we hear a lot in the draft world. But also, his length is unbelievable. This is a guy where if you have a loose handle in front of him, well, you're asking for trouble. And now, Corey, you did ask about the on-ball stuff, so I'll stop there. But, with his length, mobility, size, strength, he does cause a lot of problems on the ball, but also the way that he reads people. I mean, Corey, actually, I should ask you, because growing up, one of my basketball coaches when I was in, what was that, 3rd grade, 4th grade, he was like always yelling at us that when we're playing on ball defense to only watch the hips. And as I've grown older, I've learned that it's probably not a good idea to just be staring at my opposition's hips the whole time. And you probably want to look beyond the hips and do other things as well. But that was just so ingrained in my brain as a child, like just watch the hips. But Cason Wallace is a guy who I think is able to do it all on the ball. He's so aware of everything that's going on and uses all of his strengths and length to really, and everything that I said above, to stay in front of his man. So his on-ball defense for me is excellent. I've really enjoyed it so far.
Well, the first thing I'll say is any coach shouldn't really be yelling at 3rd and 4th graders.
That's fair. That is fair.
Just that age group. There's probably better ways to communicate, but the actual advice that he's given to a 3rd or 4th grader, that's actually really smart to hammer home. For me, it was always being told, just look at the stomach, which is a similar thing, because that part of the body is not going to lie in the direction. Your eyes can lie. The ball will lie, but your hips, your stomach, your torso, you're going to be able to follow whatever direction that aspect of the offensive player, whatever direction you could follow that. So that's actually pretty good advice for a youth basketball coach. Maybe the communication just needs to be a little different when you're considering that you're like 8 years old at that time.
8 years old, yeah.
And who knows how much you're conveying, but it's stuck in your head. So maybe he did a great job. Obviously, as you get older, you need to be able to focus on multiple different things at once. You need to use your periphery to see if a screen is coming. And but Cason, I think, is a great example of being able to use that periphery, being able to use his length to not only poke away at balls with active hands, because his hands are so active at all times, but he is able to use his offhand to feel a man coming on defense and see when the screen is coming. So I think that he is ultimately going to be incredibly valuable on that end, because as a point of attack defender, because a lot of times we undersell the importance of these guys at the point of attack and what that means to the construct of a team defense. And we want to focus so much on how bigs are the end all be all for a good defense, but being able to blow up plays and make guards work is really valuable. And if you can't start a set, then the set can't get run, right? So, just because, a big being able to protect the rim and slide over and help is ultimately going to be what takes your defense to a certain level, you still need those guys who are guarding on the ball to make guys work. Because at the NBA level, scorers are going to score. These guys are so damn good nowadays. And like the best defenders are going to struggle to stop SGA from doing whatever he wants, but you have to make SGA work for it. You can't just let him ease his way into a 30 piece, you have to make him get a difficult 30. That's what the really great defenders do. And Cason Wallace certainly has that potential. I think that a lot of times, steals can be overrated. Guys can be gambling off the ball, but so much of I feel like what Cason Wallace does is he uses his active hands on the ball, or if he's in help, it's like off a dig and like a smart stuff. There's not as much gambling as you would expect for somebody who is, a high steals guy.
Mm-hmm.
Averaging that many steals per game is something that I don't think is going to be sustainable.
Of course.
But the fact that he had a game where he had 8 steals, another game where he was at 4 steals, like there are going to be these games spread throughout where you could just feel his presence in his stock numbers. And, for a guard, that's rare because you might see that with wings, right? Like you would expect that from a Jarris Walker, maybe a Brandon Miller, maybe an Amen Thompson, but Cason Wallace is a guard who's listed at 6'4", and he looks it. So you don't expect that as much, but Cason, like you said, he could flip his hips, he could stay with his man. I think we're not going to see how versatile he is as far as how many positions can he guard in college too often this year. But he's strong and he's long, like you said, and he's smart and he's feisty. And I think on the defensive side of the ball is where you see that quote unquote dog in him. Like this is where he feels really comfortable on this side of the ball. It's where he feels at home. And you see him just exude confidence, in that Michigan State game. It was at the end of the game. I don't know. I don't remember if it was at the end of like regulation or one of the overtimes, but there was like a jump ball scenario and he just ripped it, out of the Michigan State big man's hands. And we were covering that game on playback live. And I think I said that he made the Michigan State player submit to him. I think that kind of attitude permeates through your team. It gives you moments where you can really hype yourself up. So I agree. I think he really has, lived up to the hype on that end.
No, dude, I 100% agree. I mean, the laws of the animal kingdom is what you're talking about, and I you could feel it. He's really aggressive, really strong, and in that play, like he really exerted. It's weird to say, but he really exerted his dominance, right?
Yes.
Over that big, and he has that effect on the floor because when you watch him, he's not a very vocal player, not a guy that I think will ever get caught up in like a shouting match on the floor or trash talking with the other opposition, but a guy who really tries to lead by example, one of those quiet leadership type of guys who just plays really hard and tries to make really smart plays all over the floor. And to his credit and also to sometimes his detriment, which I know 100% we're going to be talking about, is that he's very much a team player and a guy who doesn't try to do too much out of the boundaries of what he's asked to do. Now, what I mean by that isn't necessarily like that he isn't trying harder than he needs to try to. What I mean is that he really tries to stay within the walls or the parameters created, in my opinion, created by the coaching staff or what the coaches are asking him to do. So I do feel like at times, he's very much a team player is what I'm trying to. I don't want to beat what we're going to be getting into later, but he very much is a team player who does his job really, really well and tries to do it at an excellent level so that he can lead in that way. So going back to the defense, I think he does that too, where he's always doing his job, always staying on his assignment, trying to be disciplined, not getting too crazy. And it's a really valuable thing that he does, I believe.
Yeah, it's translatable. It's something that you could point to in his game and go, yeah, that's going to translate at the NBA level. You don't have to use your imagination much to see how, he's going to be able to guard the same way. Obviously, he's going to have tougher assignments at the next level at, Eastern Kentucky and the Dominican Republic and, whatever teams that he's gone up against. But we saw, him cause chaos like in that Michigan State game. Those guards on Michigan State they might not be draft prospects necessarily, but those guys were tough. They hit some tough shots, and that's he had a lot to deal with there. And 8 steals and just solid defense all around was impressive. Is there any other aspect of his defense do you think needs touching on?
A couple things. I would say the first thing is he's pretty good at blocking shots for his size. at 6'4", does a good job. I mean, I posted a couple clips in my article of him blocking Nick Smith Jr. in their matchup in high school, which was really good. Really strong rebounder for his size. He's averaging only 4 a game right now, but a guy who does like to mix it up with the bigs and does a good job with it and anticipating the ball off the rim, but also, obviously using his length and athletic ability to go and get it. Off ball stuff, I think I'd love to hear your feedback, Corey, because once again, I know it goes both ways, right? Whether it's an on ball or off ball, it's a small sample size, but I feel like he does a good job of playing the passing lanes. He shows a lot of good anticipation there. You mentioned Corey on digs and stuff like that off ball. He does a good job of reading stuff and staying disciplined. Did want to say though, and I don't remember if it was Maxwell or who it was who mentioned it in our group chat, but there have been a couple lapses with him off the ball, and that is something that I've noticed as well. But I do wonder if that's more of a, I don't know, more of a blip on the radar rather than this is kind of what he is right now, is kind of how I felt. But would love to hear your feedback on that as well.
I think it's youth and getting accustomed to speed of the game. Even the best defenders in the league are prone to lapses.
Right.
You can't be perfect on either end. And, it's one of those things. It's like an offensive player might go 8 for 10, but they still miss 2 shots. Right. Like, so even in a great defensive game, you're going to be able to pick out moments where somebody was a little bit out of position or they missed a rotation. And sometimes there are reasons for it that even by watching on film, you don't necessarily see. What if, somebody called a switch and, the other person didn't switch and that led to a breakdown. And there are just things that sometimes we don't get to see on film. And that's why scouting live sometimes where you could hear that stuff actually is really valuable. I think that, we talked about, I think he makes really smart choices a lot of the times. So if he is going to dig down on somebody, he's going to make sure that he's not leaving his responsibility. And I think that's something that's really important because he's keeping that chain in the fence, that link strong. And he doesn't, lead to breakdowns there. In the passing lanes, I think, there are guys who are really impactful. And then there are guys who are good. I think he's good there. I've been doing a lot of film on Marcus Sasser early because if you're listening to this on the No Ceilings feed, then my Marcus Sasser piece is out already. And you probably won't see too much of the defensive stuff because I'm focusing mostly on offense. But Marcus Sasser is he's like a cornerback. This dude gets multiple pick sixes a game because his anticipation is wild. And he has this quick twitch burst that allows him to just fire himself out of a cannon and get in the passing lanes and build that momentum. I don't think Cason Wallace has that same quick twitch ability to just be 0 to 60 and get in the passing lanes that way. But I think he does it positionally and being able to read the defense and using his length. So ultimately though, I think the most important part is just the way he thinks the game on that end, and then the way that he competes on that end. And as a defender, I think at the guard spot, who doesn't have, the 6'8" size that everybody wants nowadays, he does have the measurables to comp and the intelligence and the grit to compensate for, the fact that he isn't, a jumbo point guard.
Right. Corey, if I can really quickly, I think just to piggyback off of what you were saying about him off ball and the anticipation of the passing lanes, I think a good way to think about this, and for all our fans out there who don't watch football, I'm sorry, but you mentioned quarterbacks, right? And I think the best way to think about it is a guy like Darrelle Revis, who in his prime was absolutely the number one silver tier, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, cornerback, where he was unbelievable, right? He'd come down and make tackles, but on an island, Revis Island, a guy who could pick anything, right? And his, as you mentioned, burst and speed was unbelievable. And then you have guys on the other end who I think are closer to Cason Wallace, who are guys who function really well in a system and does a really good job in a system and can also go and get interceptions off. Is a guy like Richard Sherman, right? With what he did for the Seattle Seahawks and later on with the Niners, a guy who is a really, really good cornerback, but maybe not as skilled and gifted as a Darrell Revis, but still had an extraordinary career because he was so good at his job within that system, and also was good at anticipating things and breaking stuff up. Is I think what you're trying to say.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the perfect way to put it, right? And we see guys who are like that offensively as well. There's, you sometimes system and context opens up a role for you that, just makes you a really valuable piece on the floor. I was on the Bulls Gold podcast recently, and they asked me do I think that the Bulls have been really bad at development lately, because we see Lauri Markkanen playing really well in Utah and Wendell Carter Jr. is playing really well in Orlando. And I was like,
If there are any live viewers out there, apologize for this. Gonna try to get this figured out relatively soon. But I think what Corey was trying to say.
I'm back.
There he is. There he is.
Don't know what happened there. Some technical difficulties. What I responded was that I think Jim Boylan is, one of the worst coaches ever. So that certainly hurt. But ultimately, guys went and found situations that made more sense for their game. Like Lauri Markkanen, it's not like he went from the Bulls to the Jazz and is having this success, right? He went to the Cavs and he was fine there. It was a weird context. And now he finally found the right context for him and he's succeeding. Wendell Carter, you could kind of see where his value was league wide. He signed a 4-year deal worth $12.5 million off an extension. So that kind of means that he and his agent were like, there might not be a lot out there for you necessarily. People want to see you prove it. He's finally stayed healthy, put it together. He fits in with this weird Orlando team, and that's helped him be the player that he is. Even Luke Cornett, like he wasn't a great fit on the Bulls, but the Celtics are making use of him. It doesn't mean that the Bulls developmental staff struggled. It was just like, sometimes guys need better team constructs. And, with these young players, if you have a lot on your shoulders and you need to lead, that might not be the right spot, but you grow as a player every year that you're in the league, you get more experience. And finally, eventually, hopefully you find where you can thrive. Jordan Clarkson, he played on a lot of bad teams until he got traded to a good one and he became a valuable sixth man instead of known as a chucker. So being able to, play within a system is important. And some guys need that specific system. Cason Wallace might be more of that system guy in that analogy. Yeah. But he fits multiple systems. Yeah.
Right.
Right. That skill set that he brings on the defensive end is something that any team would look for. So let's take a quick break and then let's get into the offense. All right, we're back, and it's time to, I think, go a little deeper into the offense. Not deeper necessarily, but have more things to say that aren't strictly just like Cason Wallace is very good at this. Even though if you looked at Cason Wallace's offensive game, you go, it's hard for me to find a flaw. The percentages are great, right? Like there's no glaring weaknesses, much like the defense, but that might not be a great thing depending on how much you value him and where you feel comfortable taking him in the draft. So let's start, as we always do, with Cason Wallace's shooting. What do you think about the shot?
I think the foundation is there, is what I really believe, Corey. I think when I watch him shoot, whether it's the balance or the mechanics of the shot, I am not our shot doctor here, so don't come and kill me, listeners out there. That's why Corey's here, where if I'm wrong, he will correct me. But I will say, just from watching all his high school stuff, watching what we've seen so far in college, you can see the very clear building blocks to him becoming whether it's a above average shooter or a pretty damn good shooter. I think there's enough there that makes me believe, Corey. Now, is the volume there yet? No. Is the aggression there yet? I'd say absolutely not. And I can't wait for you to go off on all that. But I think overall, though, mechanics wise, foundationally, I think there's a lot to like, and that's just me thinking about like his jump shooting, right? In the paint, I think he's obviously a very good finisher. I love his floater. Now, I would like to see him take a little bit more contact and finish through contact. I don't think we've seen enough of that yet, but I'd like to see more of that because I think he can do it. He obviously has the frame to take on a lot of contact and finish through it. Now, also, he's not like the greatest vertical threat. He doesn't jump the highest, but he's also not ground bound either, which I do like. Overall, I think he's a very good athlete, not an exceptional athlete or generational or elite. Any of those superlatives I'd pass on when it comes to Cason Wallace. But if we combined good functional athleticism with his size and frame, and then we consider the shooting, just the shooting aspect of it all, I do like him, Corey. I think he will be a good shooter. Now, Corey, what you were alluding to before is when you look at the numbers, it's kind of hard to nitpick and be like, where's the issue here? Now, we could shed some light on the free throw shooting, right? Where I do think he needs to improve, and hopefully he gets to the line more often, which is something I'd like to see more of as well, with more volume and in taking more free throws. Maybe that percentage goes up. But overall, Corey, I think foundationally, I like it. We'll have to continue to watch.
Yeah, before I talk about and I mostly agree with you. So because I do think the foundation is there. He's got good form, mostly good shot prep. The free throws, 62.5%. It's not really something to worry about. Be like, oh, is he one of these guys who low free throw percentage? Maybe he just got lucky on some of these makes on low volume. Is he really a good shooter or not? I think that the free throw percentage is going to average out. I think he'll be somewhere in that 75 to 80 range. Ultimately, he just doesn't ever get to the line. And that to me is the issue for Cason right now, because as you mentioned, he has the frame, and I think that he has opportunities that he can get all the way to the hoop and generate looks for himself if he had a more aggressive scoring mindset, because often he does settle for his floater, which you can argue that he has the best floater in the class. So I don't want to say settling for it is something necessarily a bad thing. In most circumstances, it's a great shot for him. Soft touch, good arc. Like, he's going to be able to drop that in over bigs at the NBA level. But there are definitely times where, and this is something that we talked about in Nick Smith too, is that you don't want to be reliant on it. You have to mix it up. And you have to be willing to go in and generate free throws for yourself, because there are going to be times where the shot's not dropping, the floater's not dropping, and how are you going to get easy points in the paint? And if you're as big and physical as Cason is, you should be averaging more than one triple. He's averaging, I think, 1.7 free throw attempts per game right now. And that's less than one trip to the line a game, like getting to the basket, shooting free throws is part of being an efficient offensive player. So I think that he's going to prove to be a good free throw shooter. He just needs to get there. And again, that's part of a larger overarching issue that we'll have to talk about.
Shall we?
Yeah, we shall, because the 3-point shot, which, his volume there is okay. There are games where he's shooting a good volume, and there are some games where he's not. And that's because there are some games where his overall shooting volume from everywhere on the floor is low. And that, I think, is mostly because he is very cautious about what kind of shots he takes during the games. Because functionally, you watch him shoot threes, and good footwork, finishes high hand, good follow through, waves goodbye, good arc, soft touch. Like, there's a reason that he's shooting over 50% early on in this season. And again, the sample is low, but it's not going to shock me when you look at Cason Wallace's shooting percentages after the season ends and he's at 38, 39%. Like, that wouldn't shock me. Now, my question is it better for Cason to finish around 40% as a 3-point shooter because he's being cautious, or 36% as a 3-point shooter because he's expanding the parameters of his offensive game?
I think the very easy answer here, Corey, is 36% on much more aggression and higher volume. Because Corey, if I can, I think ultimately, so Corey, this is perfect that you're bringing this up because you're the best person to ask, right? Because I feel like as I've been watching him so far in his young Kentucky career, I do wonder if a lot of what we're seeing so far from Wallace in terms of his aggression and the willingness to put up shots in big moments, right? The perfect example is the game that you guys called last Tuesday against Michigan State. In a big moment at the end of regulation, he has it inside of half court and he decides to pass it at the last second, and they don't even get up a proper shot before regulation ends. My question is, do you think it's because he's just not aggressive in his personality, or could it be that he's still figuring things out within the dynamics of a Kentucky team where they do have some guys who've come back, right? A little bit older guys. They have a guy like Severe Wheeler who was already a transfer last year and is still on the team this year. Could we attribute some of this to him being a little careful, wanting to fit in, not wanting to ruffle feathers, not wanting to step over toes? Is that part of why we're seeing this from Cason Wallace? Because my thing is this, Corey, like, I think very much because of the way that he plays on defense, the way he rebounds, the way that he can get after, make these types of loose ball plays, that it's not that the aggression is not there. But so for me, once again, in my gut, I feel like it's situational, but please correct me if I'm wrong.
I no, so I think it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. You know, he is a freshman on a team with an upperclassman who is like an offense first guy. In college, they're typically, you know, on a lot of teams, there is like a hierarchy on who gets shots. So that's part of it. But I do think there is also the part of it where he, in certain instances, has shown to kind of be afraid to take chances and make mistakes offensively. I think that one play that we talked about that I think people end up harping on about his passiveness at the end of the clock where he passed it. It's not so much that I think the pass was the wrong move because he was in the, you know, kind of that corner right when he crosses half court, and he was kind of walled off to where he couldn't really retreat because it would be a backcourt violation. He ran out of room on the sideline and there was a defender in front of him. So he's kind of boxed in this weird spot to where if he did get a shot up, it would have been a pretty tough shot. So the idea of him passing it to the guy next to him made sense from the perspective of he probably had a cleaner look. The timing was off, but the part of it is he made the decision to dribble to that spot, and that was kind of the issue for me. It wasn't that he, you know, thought that was a really hard shot and he didn't have a good look. It was he dribbled to that spot almost to the kind of taking the chance away to get a look out of it. You know, you kind of want to dribble more towards the center of the court so you have a little bit more room to kind of either turn the jets on and blow by and get up a shot or whatever. And he kind of put himself in a position where he didn't give himself options. And I think part of it is because he didn't necessarily know if he wanted to be the one to put that shot up. And for me, a lot of his offensive game is reactionary. And, you know, when we go into the playmaking, that's something he's not thinking ahead. Yeah. And that's kind of why you'll see him as like I think people will talk about him as a combo guard and not necessarily a pure point, because he doesn't have those tendencies where, and it's not to say he has like low feel or something like that, because I don't think that he has low feel. He plays a smart game. I feel like you could almost describe him at like the coach's son. You know, you know, if he looked like me, people would talk about him like he was the coach's son. So I feel like he has good feel, but there are times where he's still reacting to what the defense does rather than making the defense react to what he does. And that comes across in his shot taking and some of the other decisions that he makes.
Corey, I think we should call it for what it is. I think what you're alluding to is that he doesn't necessarily have the imagination. And no, and I don't mean to say, I was thinking the word flair, but I don't want to use the word flair because you don't need to have flair to be a primary creator. But I do think there is a measure of imagination and creativity that you do
Totally.
need as a primary creator, and
The
that is where
colors in the lines.
correct. I think that's where he's lacking, for sure. I think for him, he's very much a guy who I would not even say Corey, what I wrote in my notes is I didn't even think he was a very good passer or even a good. I thought he was an adequate passer was the
Mhm.
exact word that I wrote in my notes. He can do passing, as weird as that sounds.
It doesn't sound weird.
Um,
It's
Cason Wallace can pass the ball is essentially what it is. He's not an elite playmaker. He's not a guy that's going to create these beautiful pieces of art with his passing like a Giddy or Sharif Cooper or
Halliburton,
Trey Young. Right, exactly. Like none of like those guys, but a guy who eventually will get to my NBA comps is going to do solid stuff. Just really solid stuff across the floor. Once in a while, he might surprise you with a really nice pass. Will that be the norm for him or what he's going to be asked to do consistently in an NBA offense? I think 100% not. So, Corey, what you're saying, I think, is a really great representation of Cason Wallace offensively, where he's very much not going to be your number one option, but as like a number two, number three option, is going to be able to do a lot of things very well, which makes him kind of invaluable in that way. A guy who you can fit into almost any NBA roster, and is a guy who's going to give you great value just by not being bad at any of the skills that are required on offense.
See, I kind of feel like his ceiling is more of a third option than a second option.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine
And
too.
and
Yeah.
he's more likely to be like the fourth option. I don't necessarily think he is Patrick Beverley offensively. I
Right.
think there's more to his game than a guy like that who is like a good fifth starter on a good team or has been in the past. But one of the popular comps is going to be Drew Holiday, right? Like that's the guy that everybody comps him to immediately. And Drew was on a championship team. He was the third option who
Correct.
every now and then can get hot and look like a second option. But he was the third option. And that's, on a championship team, it's really hard to be a top two guy, right? Like we're talking Jaylen Brown is a top two guy. So I do think his ceiling is much more in that third option, but more likely is he's kind of like the fourth option. And that's the thing with, I think if his ceiling is going to be the fourth option on your offense, but a guy who can kind of lead your defense as a guard, that's really valuable. I don't know if it's, 6th to 8th pick in the draft valuable, but maybe it is. It could be. I mean, you would certainly argue that Drew Holiday is who I think, is obviously tapped out as a third option on a championship team.
Right.
So obviously if you were like, hey, you can get Drew Holiday with the 6th pick, you would be like, please sign me up for that. I think Drew Holiday probably is going to end up being a better overall scorer, but we've seen guys take leaps. So it's not like it's out of the question. I feel like he's more that third option ceiling, fourth option, more realistic. But yeah, it's just there's that timidness to play outside of the boundaries of how he usually plays. And we'll see, maybe like playing in more space. There's not a ton of space at Kentucky this year. And maybe playing in NBA space will open up some of these things, especially as a playmaker. I think one of the things that I've been looking for that I haven't really seen from him yet is he doesn't really make passes more than like one pass away, right?
Yeah.
And I think part of that is the reactionary nature. He's not seeing things develop before knowing that if he goes to a certain spot, things will open up based on how the defense rotates. It's much more like the defense collapses and it's a drive and kick, or, he'll show like that he can run a basic pick and roll and get the ball to the roll man. And, that's valuable, especially as like a second side creator in an offense. Like he had a beautiful lob out of the pick and roll to Ware in that Gonzaga game that like showed great touch as a passer. Like there are certainly things that you see that you're like, oh, that was really nice,
Right.
and that he is averaging almost 5 assists a game, which is pretty good, in this offense that he's running. So there's certainly stuff there, but he's lacking that creativity and that ability to break down the second level of the defense and make guys pay with those weak side skips and,
Right.
just all the timing of his passes as well, where, you're passing early instead of late. And now guys just have that extra split second where every level that you get to, that extra split second really matters on if your shooter is going to get a clean look or not. So, yeah, he has nice moments that you're like, that was clean. But also you're like, I kind of wish that you saw more.
Yeah. No, dude, I 100% agree. And I don't know, like Corey, I liked everything that you said about him being like a third, fourth option type of player, which is why I think right now, currently on my most updated board, I have him 10th. And for me, if I was an NBA team with the 10th pick in the draft, and I knew that I was getting a solid third, fourth option who could lead my defense and have maybe 1, 2, maybe even up to 3 all-star seasons, I'd have no problem taking him with the 10th pick in the draft. And it's funny, like, for us to say, like, well, the 6 is too high. It kind of is too high, though. Like, if we're talking about like that area of the draft, where I feel like the 10th pick feels good. I think the 10th pick is fair. Even in my article, when I wrote about him and his passing, I actually wrote plus passing ability, which I think could be fair, but also might be a little too high, even on my end, when I was talking about his passing, because I do agree with you. But overall, I just think offensively, he will be good. He will be good, with potential for him to grow, because as you mentioned, Corey, he is a freshman, and these guys at what is he, 18, 19? He's probably 19 right now, right?
He just turned 19.
So, by the time he's 22, 24, he may look like a very different player on the offensive side of the ball. And I think that's what we're hoping for, because the defense has such a strong foundation right now. If he can get his offense up 2 levels, 3 levels, and we're talking about a really, really fun NBA player. So, if you're listening, Cason, we wish you the best, bud. We really do hope you figure it out and you take a more aggressive approach on the offensive side of the ball. And fingers crossed, maybe even within his freshman year, by the end of it, he exerts some more of that dominance over even his own teammates.
Yeah, and he's shown flashes of like the things that you kind of want to see. You just want to see them more often, right? Like, he's a good enough shooter from the 3-point line that teams are going to close out to him. And when he does that, he's able to take advantage, throw a pump fake, hit like a 1-2 dribble pull up, or get to that floater. Again, we'd love to see him attack the hoop a little harder, draw some contact, finish around the rim. But I think the thing with him, where you talk about like in that 10 range, I think 10 to 14 is probably like a good area. Like, he might not have the flashiest box scores or game, but projecting forward, you also want to, look at the physical attributes that he brings. Like, Tyrese Hunter had, some pretty explosive games, right? And he brings a lot of like NBA qualities. I think that I know I'm higher on him, I think, than the general consensus is. And I think it'd be hard to argue that Tyrese Hunter should go ahead of Cason in a draft,
Right.
because he is a tiny guard. And while he does have abilities to make up for that, we've seen the NBA shy away. So part of the appeal with Cason too is that while he might not be a Josh Giddey level jumbo creator, he is a guy that can play off the ball, and his skill set, where he is mostly like a spot up guy who's attacking closeouts and stuff like that and running basic pick and roll, like, is a good complement to a lot of the guys that play in the league. Like, he fits next to your Lucas and, a guy like LeBron or James Harden or Josh Giddey or, guys like that. Like, he fits next to that. He's easy to put in any team construct and just be like, all right, you could thrive, unless, you're drafting him super high and you're like, hey, we want you to be the offensive hub of everything we do. And like, no team is going to realistically do that. So I think that right now, because I think we could also break down his game in doing so. Let's go into our comp. So if you were buying stock in Cason Wallace, who may you have also bought stock in previously?
Well, Corey, really quickly, I want to piggyback off of everything that you just said. And what came into my brain was that he's not, I don't think he's going to be a superhero. I think he's going to be a super sidekick, if that's fair. And I don't think that is an indictment against what we believe his future is going to be as an NBA player. There are a lot of really good NBA players who had very successful careers as super sidekicks. The two examples that came to my mind that I wrote about in my article, along with, of course, the Drew Holiday comp, was Larry Hughes. If you grew up in the 90s and the 2000s, then you should be pretty familiarized with who Larry Hughes was, and a guy who learned to play next to an Allen Iverson, learned how to play next to a Gilbert Arenas and Anton Jameson, a guy who was a pivotal piece next to even LeBron James, in Cleveland. But a guy, well, pivotal might be a stretch.
Huge signing.
Huge signing.
Shook
Larry
the
Hughes.
NBA world to its core at the time.
Just like Darren Williams was for the Cavs in 2018. But Larry Hughes was a guy who, go back and look at Larry Hughes' steals numbers, and he was consistently at the top of the league. A guy who was a solid defender. But of course, Larry Hughes was, in my opinion, way more dynamic on the offensive end of the floor. A guy who could really handle the ball and was shifty as hell and could do a lot of things. But I chose Larry Hughes, Malcolm Brogdon, Drew Holiday for a very specific reason. These are guys who, over the course of their NBA careers, learned to play next to alpha level superstars. Right. Look at Malcolm Brogdon in the situation that he's in right now with the Boston Celtics. He's playing next to a Jaylen Brown, playing next to a Jason Tatum, right? Derek White, a very, very good team, and a guy who knows how to function within a team like that without ever freaking out or asking for his name to be called consistently. A guy who can fit in with any system, fit in next to superstars, fit in next to high volume guys, is why I chose those guys, because I really do believe that Cason's going to have that type of game, whether it's everything that he offers to you on the defensive side of the ball, but also offensively. I think he's going to eventually be a rock solid catch and shoot 3-point shooter, a guy who can be your secondary, tertiary creator, a guy who's going to do little things all over the floor for you, where he's just going to so seamlessly fit next to an alpha, is why I chose Larry Hughes and Malcolm Brogdon and Drew Holiday.
Yeah, Larry Hughes was also a Bulls legend. Let's not forget.
Also the Warriors. I forgot to mention the Warriors too.
But the Wizards contract year, Larry Hughes was he's a pretty special player. But adding on, and I think kind of like a similar kind of vein to maybe like a Malcolm Brogdon, somewhere in the middle of all it. I kind of thought like Kirk Heinrich.
Good.
Like Kirk Heinrich was a guy who came in like as a point guard, but he was able, he averaged, like 15 to 17 points per game in the league. He was like a 5 assist guy. He rebounds. And the thing that made him valuable was how good he was on the defensive end as a guard, where he was able to guard ones and twos kind of equally well. And he was a guy that, was known kind of historically. He gave Dwayne Wade fits, and was able to cover those dynamic guys, even though, maybe he wasn't the most dynamic athlete, but he was just so good positionally and effort wise that, he was able to make it happen on that end versus a lot of those guards. NBA defenses are a lot more sophisticated now, and offenses are as well. So you're going to have to, do a little bit more switching up positionally onto bigger wings. But I do think Cason has the ability to do that. And looking at guys like Malcolm Brogdon, Derek White, and Larry Hughes, and Drew, and all those guys, I think those are good examples of what Cason is, capable of as a player. So it's time for America's favorite segment, Albert. This is your chance to sell us a nice pair of scissors for Cason Wallace.
All right, guys. So I'm going to, obviously because I wrote about the scissors, I'm going to avoid that here, but I'm going to give it to you guys very practically. If you're a manager, supervisor, GM, VP, anywhere, whether it's at a McDonald's or a Fortune 500 company, if you manage people, right, or an NBA head coach, if you manage people, the thing that you're going to be looking for is you want guys on your team, obviously, who can do the high end, unbelievable things. Right. You want your one percenters, you want your heavy hitters, you want your home run hitters, right? At the same time, you also want your guys who are going to be steady, guys who won't rock the boat, guys who won't cause you problems, guys that you'll realize just looking at your agenda or your roster or whatever and realizing, man, I haven't talked to this guy in a couple of months, right? And the reason why you haven't talked to this guy in a couple of months is because he does his job. He doesn't cause any problems. He isn't yelling at somebody in the break room because they forgot to take out the coffee grounds. He's not doing inappropriate things with other coworkers. He's just a rock. So he or she or they are a great employee, does their job really well, never causes any problem. If you're a manager, supervisor, head coach, GM, whatever, you want somebody like that on your team. Cason Wallace is exactly that. He's a guy who in Q1 is going to do about average, do everything that you ask him for. In Q2 could be in the top 1%, performing at a extremely high level. Then in Q3, back to normal. Q4, high average. Ultimately, what we're trying to sell you on is a guy who is always going to do his job really, really well, while also having who also has a potential to give you more, is Cason Wallace. So if you're an NBA team GM out there, listen to me carefully. You need guys like Cason Wallace on your team because eventually you're going to have guys who give you headaches. You're going to have guys who can go hot and cold, but you need someone who's right there in the middle, and that's Cason Wallace. So you should probably grab him with whatever pick you have in the draft, except for probably in the top 5. But anything beyond that seems like pretty fair game to me.
Well said. All right. This was a fun episode on a guy that I think is going to be really interesting to monitor through the rest of the cycle. But I think he was a smart first choice. One, because you wrote on him, and I think that's just fun to do in a timely way, a topical way. But also, I think he's one of those guys who started out really steady, and I think for him, there's really nowhere to go but up. It's hard to kind of see him hitting a bottom or going through some real lulls, because he brings a lot to the table that's always going to kind of make him impact winning in other ways at the least. So, all right, Albert, tell the people around the World Wide Web where they can find you on the internets.
You can find me at Alberto Gim on Twitter. That toe is spelled TOE, like the one on your foot, is where you could find me on Twitter. You could find me on different platforms too. I'm on Instagram and TikTok, and it's still unbelievable, Corey, what the stuff we're doing on TikTok, and still feels very strange. I told my wife the other day, I was like, hey, like I did a TikTok, and it felt like the most boomer thing I've ever said ever in my life. I did a TikTok is what I said to my wife, and all she did was scoff at me and laugh. So that's the world that we live in now, but that's where you can find me, and we're trying to have fun out here, and I'm excited to be writing. I'll probably be dropping another article next week, is where you can find me.
And you can find me at Corey Tulaba. You can find the written work at noceilingsnba.com. Make sure that you subscribe. We are dropping content every single day it's free. You just get it delivered to your inbox. It's a pretty sweet deal for you, because we're dropping straight heat with some really, really interesting and diverse pieces. And make sure that if you haven't yet, that you are rating and reviewing the No Ceilings NBA Draft podcast feeds, because we have a bunch of amazing shows on that feed. We have Draft Deeper, we have Home and Away, we have Deep Dives, the Draft Deck, and the No Ceilings NBA Draft Show, Monday through Friday. And where else are you getting hour-long episodes 5 days a week on the NBA Draft? We cover it like nobody's business, man. So we're going to continue doing that throughout the rest of the cycle. I hope that everybody either has or had a happy Thanksgiving, and gear up, because these conference games are starting soon. It's about to get real. And until next week, y'all, we are out. Peace.